Okay, I just want to start with some real talk, put some cards on the table, okay? I'm perfectly aware that people who signed up for this conference probably didn't sign up to hear a white British, non-Muslim man talk about issues faced by British Muslim communities. I get it. I also get the fact that we've become increasingly fixated with race and gender, and I realise I tick two of the wrong boxes for that as well. So, cards on the table. But more seriously, I hope that what I'm going to show you over the next few minutes presents to you a very polite, very heartfelt, very genuine, and a very sort of humble offering to show you some of the ways in which I view some of these issues. Now, I'm an outsider because of my non-Muslimness, but I'm also a bit of an outsider because I tend to use a lot of statistics, and that sometimes can sort of frustrate and concern people. And someone today already said in a panel, oh, well, you know, you can use statistics to tell any story you like, and I fully accept that. So I'm not suggesting that statistics is the only way or the best way of telling this story, but I'm presenting it to you as a way to show you some of the complexities of these stories, okay? So I'm going to be asking 3 questions this afternoon. And the first question is Islamophobia rising in the UK? And my simple answer to this question, which might surprise and concern some of you, is we don't know. Now, that might be a surprising way to answer that question, so let me explain how I would go about answering it. These are the sources where you can regularly read and see and hear that Islamophobia in the UK is rising. And the sources of information they use tend to be from one of these 4 places. So Tell Mama and Hope Not Hate have done an incredible job over the last few years of raising awareness of these issues. The information that Tell Mama gathers tends to be self-reported, and very rarely is it made publicly available. Hope Not Hate have done a similarly excellent job of raising awareness, but the types of information they use tend to be single case studies, okay? When you see the newspaper stories about rising Islamophobia, whether you've realised it or not, you'll have seen this graph here. And it's a graph showing what's called police-recorded crime. And that is crime reported to the police. And as you can see, from 2010 up until last year, there was what looks like a pretty steady increase in religious hate crime. And this figure is often used to tell a story about rising Islamophobia, okay? Now, there's 2 things wrong with police-recorded crime, I would argue. Not wrong exactly, but there's 2 difficulties in using the data. First is this. Police-recorded crime is crime reported by the public. Now, there's an obvious thing here. Is it that crime is rising, or is it that more people are reporting it to the police? In fact, we don't know looking at this, and I would guess that those 2 things are intertwined in this increase. So some of it represents an actual increase in crime, perhaps, and perhaps some of it represents more reporting. Now, there's another thing wrong with police-recorded crime, and that's that the Office of National Statistics, the source down here, recently downgraded police-recorded crime and said that it was no longer to be used as national statistics. The gathering of it and the reporting of it doesn't meet the standards set by the Office of National Statistics. So this story that you read here, using this graph, I would argue, is problematic. So where else could you find out information about statistics to do with this stuff? Well, another source, not a perfect source, but another source is the Crime Survey of England and Wales. And the Crime Survey goes around about 40,000 households every year. And here's what they report over the last few years about hate crime in this country. So, from the reports published since 2007, the Crime Survey has shown a steady decrease in hate crime across England and Wales. Okay, now you might be thinking, well, that's all hate crime. What about religious hate crime? And in fact, it's very hard to estimate using Crime Survey data, but the best estimate they give for the last few years looks like this. It's flat. So from 2007 to 2019, the Crime Survey, which does meet all the standards set by the Office of National Statistics, and they argue that in the crime survey, religious hate crime has plateaued around 40,000 a year. Now, clearly that's 40,000 too many, I get that, but it's not the steady increase, and it's not the dramatic decrease. So I would argue, is Islamophobia rising in the UK? According to the statistics that you'll read in the newspaper, I would argue we don't know. Here's another question. Are Muslims unfairly targeted by the police? Now, whenever you read about police stop and search among Muslim communities, the data that's used it often relates to black or Asian people. Now, we know, of course, that some black people and some Asian people are Muslim. We know that. But not a single report used by the government or used by journalists or academics has ever used data specifically related to British Muslim communities. And a couple of years ago, I published what I think is the first study to use large-scale data specifically related to Muslim people. And here's what I found, and it's a story of two halves, this, okay? So I looked at crime survey data over the last few years, and I asked myself, what's the penalty for being Muslim when it comes to being stopped by the police? So how much more likely are British Muslims to be stopped by the police than other groups? And in the next slide I'm going to show you, it's a comparison with Christian people. And the answer to my question, are they untargeted, is yes, maybe, as you'll see in a minute, okay? So here's my first slide. So being Muslim makes it 1% more likely that you'll be stopped by the police than being Christian. Now, these circles are drawn to scale, so the eagle-eyed among you will see that the green circle is 1% bigger than the purple circle. Now, things that really dramatically increase the likelihood of being stopped by the police have nothing to do with religion. It's being male, being young, and either being black or of mixed ethnicity. Now, of course, we know some of those people are also Muslim, but when you separate all those factors, or as statisticians say, when you control for them and you sort of extract just the single fact of being Muslim, there's a 1% increase. Now, here's a story of two halves, the second half. Keep an eye on the green circle, okay? I'm going to show you now the increase in likelihood of being searched once a person has been stopped by the police, okay? And see if you can see the circle increasing. Oh, yeah. So, Muslim people, once stopped by the police, are 8 times more likely to be searched, okay? So, I would argue that the evidence is mixed, is dramatic, is concerning, and actually, this level of evidence is exactly what the police need in order to tackle unfairness in their interventions with suspected criminals who happen to be Muslim. And in the paper that I published, I sort of did some theorizing as to why this might be the case. Now, the police aren't, by law, supposed to ask you too many questions when they stop you, but I think what the British police do is establish whether the person they've stopped is Muslim and then proceed to search them on that basis. So here's my final question today. Do British Muslims agree about what makes something or someone Islamophobic? And the answer is no. So, how did I come to this answer? I was part of a research project which showed these statements to Muslim people and asked them to respond. And the question was, if someone said this to you, would you think they're Islamophobic? These are the statements. Most Muslims sympathise with terrorists. Muslims have too much influence in Britain. Muslims often overreact to criticisms of their religion. The interests of Muslims in Britain are very different to the rest. British Muslims have no interest in integrating into British society. British Muslims do not share Western values. So those were the statements. And the first question we asked was, the first question I analysed was, how likely is it that the respondent was able to give an answer at all? Like, not just to say whether it was Islamophobic, but to make a decision as to whether it was or was not. And myself and the team were quite surprised to see that 1 in 5 people, the red column down the right, didn't know whether these statements were or were not Islamophobic. Now, we compared this to a group of Jewish people who were shown similar statements about anti-Semitism, and the percentage that didn't know, that couldn't give an answer, was about 1 or 2% for each question. So I would argue that amongst British Muslims, there is a lot less certainty about what constitutes Islamophobia. Now, think back to the statements I showed you, okay? You might be sitting there thinking, well, that one's not Islamophobic, or, well, that one is definitely Islamophobic. You might think they're all not, or you might think they all are Islamophobic, okay? Whatever you're thinking, let me tell you that half the data set would disagree with you. Because when we showed them to the Muslim respondents, there was a kind of 50-50 split on each statement. In fact, there was no majority view about any of the statements constituting Islamophobia. So we can see that there was very little consensus. We showed this to around 1,200 Muslim respondents. They were chosen randomly, so I argue that they represent nationally the attitudes of the wider Muslim population. The other thing I would like to say is that in the publication, we addressed the question as to whether all Muslim people were likely to be as sensitive as each other to these statements. So the ones that were sensitive, were there any differences among them? So these were the findings. For the Muslim people in the data set who had a degree or some form of higher education, there was a 63% increase in the sensitivity towards the statements. For the respondents who were born in Asia, there was around a 40% decrease in the likelihood that they would be sensitive to the statements. So the people who self-identified as Shia in the dataset, forgive me, they were almost twice as likely to be sensitive. Now, I can talk through why I think this is the case in the question and answers, if you're interested at all. But what I would say at this point is that there's no evidence to show that all Muslims are equally affected by these Islamophobic tropes. So just to conclude, I would say this, that I fully accept that there are real issues and real problems out there. The disproportionate amount of Muslim people being searched by the police is clearly one. The other work I've done around British Muslim communities, talking to British Muslim women who face everyday discrimination in everyday locations. I've done quite a bit of work on this. It's not often captured by statistics, rarely captured by the police, of course. So there are real issues out there. But I firmly believe, with a good heart, that my Muslim neighbour deserves a better standard of evidence than they're currently getting from newspaper reports and campaign groups. And I would argue that we need to move beyond simple headlines. Thank you for listening.